what I know you already talked a little bit about your being fascinated with whales, right?
Mhm.
That how you came to this like connection with the ocean, or was it because you first lived close to the ocean when you were growing up, and then as learned more about it or saw the whales, that connection increased?
Um, it was growing up next to the water, and see, you don't. I've never seen a whale in Boston Harbor, although they have been there.
Yeah.
Um, and it was later that looking at these huge animals, but even like if you live I have relatives in Santa Cruz, for example, and if you walk down the pier, you see the sea lions,
Mhm.
and they're just resting on the pilings, and they're just huge, and they're having a day out on the pier, just like I was having a day out on the pier. So I think they're fascinating. I have to hold myself back from getting too close because they don't know who I am. You know, teeth. Um, and I can't. I don't know anyone who are those people that can go out and see a whale and not be impressed and not be in awe, or even seals or sea lions or the smaller you know species that you see. So it just was one thing on top of another, but a lot of it is growing up near the water, you know, and knowing how to swim. And even when I went to Girl Scout camp, it was in one of the Boston Harbor Islands. So every day we'd go down to the pier and take the boat to Thompson's Island, have day camp on the island, and come home via the boat. And as a kid, it was just awesome to be able to do that every day. I had a friend who lived on Thompson's Island whose dad taught there, and he'd come to class in to the school that I was attending. And I thought, you get to go on the boat every day?
Oh
And he goes, sometimes it's freezing.
my God. Yeah.
So that was, it was just all part and parcel of being a kid, you know, in the neighborhood I grew up in was South Boston, and just being a kid there, and you know, going down to the water when I was young and digging for clams,
Mhm.
and people did that all along the beach. Now I would never do that today.
Yeah.
I would never eat a clam well, I don't eat clams anymore anyway, but I would never. If I saw somebody digging down there, I'd say, you'd better be careful.
Mhm.
And even here in the lakes in New England, because of coal plants in the Midwest and bringing across a lot of the mercury, which falls as methyl mercury into the water, and it's imbibed by the fish. So if you eat the fish, and if you are a big fish eater, you're going to get mercury poisoning. And that's why, catch and release is something that you need to do. And then it goes on from there. You can't use lead hooks because the wildlife eat them. The loons. We're trying to preserve our loons here in New England. They winter on the coast, and then they come to the lakes to mate and have their young. But they eat things, or they swallow hooks and tackle. And I mean, it's akin to whales being wrapped up in fishing lines.
Mhm.
There's not much of a difference.
Just on a
So
smaller scale.
yeah, so every step of the way you need to be careful. But you know when you realize that even in our lakes, in New Hampshire lakes, which are big holiday sports spots, people have camps and houses on the lake that they go up to in the summertime. Um, Even just to go out and fish in the lake, you better know uh, what the health of the fish that you're catching
Yeah.
is. It can be terrible for your family. So, but then I have other people who There's a movement called Casting for Recovery, which has um, women who've had breast cancer and the ability after an operation to go like this with your arm.
Mhm.
So casting is good exercise, gets people outdoors, elevates their mood. I have a former teacher of mine who's very active as a teacher in Casting for Recovery. But again, it's catch and release. They don't take anything home. So, um, you know, those are some of the things that are ongoing activities. But again, you have to be very certain of what's in your water, you know, to keep yourself safe, to keep the animals safe.
Yeah, I think
So
there's, unless you're really connected to what's happening in your local community and what's affecting it, most people sometimes don't know.
people people are too busy, and if you have a job that's 40 hours a week or more, and you have kids, and you have family obligations, and you might have parents that you need to take care of, you don't have a lot of time to really understand what's going on around you. Um, and again, for me, quilts are one way. Art quilts are another, are a way to get that message across, because when you have shows, say you're part of a quilt guild or you're in an art show and your art is hanging there, and the people coming in aren't necessarily uh, ecologically minded,
Mhm.
and they look at this and they get a message and they go, oh, and if the artist, sometimes you're there and you're talking about your work and you can impart information to people, in a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
um, it's all a learning process. I mean, I'm learning something new about the environment every day, that, I think, I hope it helps.
I truly believe that art is a good way to introduce sometimes certain like hard topics, and also not always look at the environment in a doom and gloom way, although some of that
Mhm.
happens, but also in a way that makes it a little bit more approachable, or more like easier to have some of the hard conversations, but also move towards, okay, so maybe we need to shift our certain habits so that we can have not only the, well, we're killing the fish, but what's the positive side of that is we'll have more fish, and
Right,
healthier fish.
right.
We'll be able to enjoy the lakes better, or the oceans. And I feel like sometimes like art is a great vehicle to open some of those conversations, or even bring some of those conversations, like you mentioned. Somebody might not be even thinking about that, and they'll look at your quilt and they'll be like, look, it's like beautiful. And then they'll look closer at it and they'll see there's a whale. And then they might look at the little plaque about the artist and a little bit about it. And now you have somebody that says, you know what, maybe I should care about the whales.
Right. And doing tours on, like I said, going on whale watches, just walking along the water. If you can scuba dive, that's awesome. If you can snorkel, that's awesome. And if you begin to love that, and then you go to places where the reef is disappearing, you know that's a call for help. Maybe you can do something about it. Donate, be active, cause, whatever. But it's all education, and it's interesting too. I mean, I find it fascinating every time I learn something new. I just learned the other day, when whales die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean floor, and then they become food and shelter even for other species. So that to me is, it's very cool, that they're helping even at the very end. Um, and um, I think it's just a fascinating thing to happen. But even, here, where it's very wooded, New Hampshire is a very wooded state. And when trees fall in the forest, branches fall, if branches fall on my lawn, I just take them, I throw them into the woods. because they become shelter for animals, squirrels, rabbits, whatever, possums. Um, and we have a huge, for example, huge tick infestation here in New England, which if you get bitten by a tick, go to the doctor because Lyme disease and the co-infections are pretty terrible in the body. But, you know, when you see a possum, thank the possum. They eat the ticks. Thank you, thank you. Go off, eat ticks. So, and ticks were never, it was never, it's climate change that's causing it. It's the warming, and they're coming north. So they were growing up, they were maybe a tick a year or something. You'd hear about a tick. But now, if you go through the undergrowth, they will cling to you. So if you're a hiker, you've really got to be careful. You know, people are out there treating their clothes with permethrin and all sorts of things, and I've seen people, I know people with Lyme disease. It's really horrible, horrible thing. So those are, things that I just feel as I get older, there are more and more things you have to look out for when you go outside. And that was just never the case. I sound like an old person saying, well, when I was younger, but it is changing. The climate is changing. We have the last 2 days, we had the hottest days in June since 1888 when the weather first became recorded because of the heat dome that came over us. It was 102 degrees in Boston. That doesn't happen. And Boston's on the water, but because of a westerly wind, because wind patterns have now changed, it was pushing the heat right to the shore. So even on the beach, people were really hot. You couldn't be. So if people think that our weather and climate are not changing, they are. And it's going to get worse if we don't make a huge effort on many fronts.